At the airport, my own son looked at the flight attendant and said, "She's not with us. Send her to coach." In that moment, I felt invisible. But just minutes later, the captain stepped out, and one word from him silenced everyone. "My name is Marion Holt. I'm 72 years old, a retired businesswoman, a widow, and a grandmother. Life hasn't been easy, but I learned long ago that difficulty doesn't mean defeat. It means endurance. I worked hard for decades, sometimes through nights that seemed endless, raising my son Daniel after my husband passed away far too soon. Everything I did, every penny saved, every hour spent hunched over paperwork in a cramped office, every tear I cried into the quiet of an empty bed, was for my family, for him. Before I begin, I'd like to pause and ask, where are you watching from? I always love knowing the different places people tune in from. It makes the world feel a little smaller, and maybe just a little kinder than the one I was standing in that day. When Daniel suggested a family trip, I thought it was his way of reconnecting. He and his wife, Melissa, had been distant with me for some time. Polite, yes, but with a sharpness underneath, as if my presence was a burden they tolerated rather than embraced. I thought perhaps this trip would be a chance to mend that distance, to remind them that love isn't a thing that expires with age, to show my grandchildren, Emma and Josh, that their grandmother was still a part of their lives. What they didn't know, and what I never told them, was that I had quietly paid for most of the trip. I had done so not out of pride, but out of hope. Hope that if I lightened their financial burden, they would be free to simply enjoy the time together. I didn't need them to thank me. I didn't even need them to know. I only wanted to feel, for a week, like a family again. The morning of the flight, I put on my best travel clothes. Not expensive, but neat. A soft blue cardigan, a scarf my late husband once bought me, and shoes that were worn but comfortable. I remember looking in the mirror and telling myself, "Today will be good. Today will be different." I smiled, even though the edges of that smile trembled with nerves. Old habits of bracing for disappointment are hard to break. When we arrived at the airport, I trailed behind them with my suitcase, trying not to slow them down. Melissa kept her arm looped through Daniel's, laughing quietly with him, while the children bounced with excitement. Every so often, Daniel glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. I told myself not to imagine distance where none existed, but deep down, I could feel it. The invisible gap between us widening with every step we took toward the gate. Airports always make me think of journeys I once dreamed of taking with my husband. We had planned to travel once Daniel was older, to see places we had only read about in books. But life rarely unfolds as planned. Illness came, bills piled up, and suddenly those dreams had to be shelved. Still, I never lost the magic of watching planes lift into the sky, carrying people toward possibility. That morning, I clung to that magic, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, this flight would lift us towards something better as a family. But as we stood in line for boarding, my heart started to sink. Daniel and Melissa stood close together with the children in front, and I felt like an afterthought at the end of the line. I tried to remind myself that travel is stressful, that people get snappy in airports. I wanted to believe that the coolness I sensed from him was just nerves. Yet there was a part of me, an old mother's instinct, that whispered otherwise. I had no way of knowing then that the humiliation waiting for me was not accidental. It was intentional, and it would unfold in front of strangers, under the harsh fluorescent lights of an airport gate, just minutes before I thought we would all fly together. The airport was buzzing with that familiar, chaotic energy. Families juggling strollers and suitcases, business travelers tapping at laptops, voices announcing gate changes over the loudspeaker. I should have felt excitement, the kind I used to feel when I traveled with Daniel as a boy. Back then, He would press his little face against the window, eyes wide, asking me how planes stayed in the air. I'd hold his hand tight, reassuring him when the engines roared. Those were some of my favorite memories, moments where I felt needed, where my presence gave him comfort. But this morning, walking through that airport with him as a grown man, I felt anything but needed. He didn't look back to check if I was keeping up. Melissa walked in step with him, her manicured hand resting on his arm, as if she wanted to remind me, and perhaps herself, that she was his partner now. I didn't begrudge her that. I never wanted to compete for his love, but it was the way she barely glanced in my direction, as though I were just a shadow trailing behind, that made my chest tighten. I kept telling myself not to be sensitive. "You're just tired, Marion," I whispered inwardly. "Don't read too much into it." But then Daniel made a small comment, so small that someone else might have missed the sting. "Mum, try not to slow us down, all right? TSA lines can be rough with you." With you. As if my presence alone made things complicated. I swallowed hard and nodded, even though a dozen responses burned on the tip of my tongue. I could have reminded him of the times I juggled a toddler and a stroller through airports all on my own. I could have reminded him that he was only here today, taking this trip, because of the foundation I laid for him. But I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the only shield left to a mother who doesn't want to spark a fight. We made it through security without much trouble, and soon enough, we were standing near the gate. I watched as Daniel bought snacks for the kids, laughing with them, slipping them candy as Melissa scolded him in a playful way. They looked like the perfect young family. And me? I sat off to the side, clutching my boarding pass, trying to ignore the ache that had started spreading inside me. When the announcement for boarding came, I stood and walked toward them, my suitcase rolling awkwardly behind me. I fell into line behind them, ready to hand my ticket to the gate agent. That's when I noticed something odd. Their boarding passes were marked differently than mine. Mine said Zone 3. Theirs, I realized, had first class, printed in bold letters at the top. My heart gave a little jolt. Surely there had been some kind of mix-up. We were supposed to be traveling together. Maybe they'd been upgraded unexpectedly, or maybe there had been a mistake in the booking system. I was ready to laugh it off, to suggest we ask the attendant about it. But before I could open my mouth, Daniel leaned forward to the young flight attendant at the gate. His words were clear, deliberate, and loud enough that the people around us turned their heads. "She's not with us. Just send her to coach." At first I didn't process it. My ears heard the words, but my heart refused to believe them. I looked at him, waiting for the wink, the grin, the reassurance that he was joking. But there was no grin. Only his face, hard and indifferent, as though I were nothing more than a stranger holding up the line. The flight attendant blinked, caught between confusion and professionalism. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said carefully. "Are you traveling with them?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Daniel cut me off. His voice carried just enough edge to make the words sharp. "She's not with us." Melissa pretended to busy herself with the children, though I caught the faint curl of a smile at the corner of her lips. The children, bless them, looked bewildered, glancing from me to their father as if trying to understand why he was treating me like this. I felt heat rush to my face. My knees weakened, my grip on my suitcase tightened. All at once, I was painfully aware of the stares around me, the other passengers who had heard his words, the ones who were now whispering to each other. I wasn't Marion Holt, mother and grandmother. I was just the woman who didn't belong. I nodded mutely, forcing a brittle smile, ready to accept the humiliation and walk to the back of the plane. Because what else could I do? Argue? Beg? I'd been humiliated enough times in my life to know that sometimes the only way to survive is to keep your head down and keep walking. Little did I know that fate had its own way of intervening, and Daniel was about to learn just how wrong he was. I can still feel That moment, as if it's carved into me, standing at that gate, clutching my boarding pass, hearing my own son deny me in front of strangers. There are wounds you expect in life, the kind that come with time, with illness, with grief, but to be publicly discarded by the very child you carried, raised, and loved. That wound feels like it bleeds in places no one else can see. The flight attendant looked from Daniel to me, her face caught in the awkward balance between duty and compassion. "Ma'am," she asked gently, "do you have your boarding pass?" My fingers shook as I handed it over. She scanned it, her expression shifting when she saw it was indeed valid. Her eyes softened, but before she could say anything further, Daniel leaned closer to her and repeated, sharper this time, "She's not with us. Just send her to coach." Each word felt like a lash. "She's not with us." As if I were an intruder, a stranger who had somehow slipped into their family by mistake. I wanted to shout, "Of course I'm with you. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. How dare you pretend otherwise?" But my throat closed around the words. Silence pressed against my chest, heavy and suffocating. Melissa kept her head down, busying herself with adjusting Emma's hair and pretending she hadn't heard a thing. But I saw it, the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. And I wondered if this cruelty had been rehearsed. A silent agreement between husband and wife. Daniel would deliver the line. Melissa would look away. And together, they'd reduce me to an afterthought. Emma tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, isn't Grandma coming with us?" Her voice was small, uncertain. But Daniel only shushed her, patting her shoulder in a way that said, "Don't question me." The people around us shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between us. Strangers, caught in someone else's family drama. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Others stared with a mixture of pity and judgment. And me? I stood there, cheeks burning, wishing I could vanish into the floor. In that instant, memories flashed through my mind, like cruel little reels of film. Daniel's tiny hand gripping mine at this very kind of gate when he was 5, terrified of flying. The way he'd cling to me during turbulence, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." The nights I worked double shifts so he could have birthday parties that looked like everyone else's. The way I sat through every one of his school recitals, clapping the loudest, tears brimming with pride. And now, here I was, the same woman, the same mother. But in his eyes, I was nothing more than a burden he could cast aside with a sentence. I drew in a shaky breath, nodded at the attendant, and forced my feet to move. If my son wanted me to sit in coach, then coach it would be. I told myself I would bear it quietly. I would swallow the humiliation like I had swallowed so many hurts before. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We endure. We protect, even if it means protecting them from their own shame. But as I turned to walk toward the boarding tunnel, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass window. A tired old woman, shoulders slightly bent, eyes dulled by years of giving more than she received. And for the first time in my life, I wondered, when did I become invisible to the very people I lived for? The flight attendant shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. I could tell she wanted to say something, to push back against Daniel's coldness. But professionalism held her tongue. She handed back my pass with a quiet, "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." Her eyes filled with pity. Pity. I had never wanted anyone's pity. I rolled my suitcase forward, the weight of it nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. Daniel's words replayed in my head like a cruel echo. "She's not with us. She's not with us." Little did I know, the echo was about to be shattered. Because fate, or maybe justice, had a way of speaking louder than any son's cruelty. And before that plane left the ground, the world was going to see me for who I really was. I was just about to step into the tunnel when it happened. A sudden hush seemed to fall over the gate area, that ripple of silence that tells you something or someone important has arrived. I felt it before I saw it. The atmosphere shifted, curious eyes turning toward the cockpit door. The door opened, and out stepped the captain. Tall, composed, his uniform sharp against the fluorescent lighting. He scanned the boarding line, his gaze landing not on Daniel, not on Melissa, but directly on me. And then, to my utter shock, his face broke into a broad smile. "Mrs. Holt!" he exclaimed warmly, striding toward me. His voice carried easily, cutting through the murmur of passengers. "What a pleasure to see you again. We're honored to have you on board today." I blinked, startled, as every head nearby turned. My son froze. His grip on his boarding pass faltered, his jaw slackening. Melissa's painted smile evaporated. For the first time that morning, the whispers weren't about my humiliation. They were about me. The captain extended his hand, shaking mine firmly, as though I were an old friend. "On behalf of the airline," he said, "thank you for everything you've done for our company. We don't get many of our long-term investors traveling with us. It's always an honor." There it was, the word that seemed to hang in the air like a thunderclap. Investor. Passengers gasped. I heard the whispers. "She's an investor." Did he just say that? A woman clutched her husband's arm, staring at me with sudden recognition. Even the flight attendants exchanged wide-eyed glances. Daniel's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. For once, my son, the man who had just denied me as though I were nothing, stood speechless. I wanted to smile. I wanted to look at him and say, "Do you see me now? Do you finally understand?" But all I did was nod humbly to the captain, my voice steady, though my heart thundered in my chest. "Thank you, Captain. That's very kind of you." He waved off my modesty. "Kind? Mrs. Holt, it's the least we can do. Your early investments helped us weather some of our toughest years. I remember the files myself. You've been with us longer than most of our current shareholders." I hadn't planned on any of this. I never told Daniel, never told Melissa. I never bragged about the stocks I bought decades ago, back when this airline was barely scraping by. My husband, God rest his soul, had taught me to be wise with money. "Think long-term, Marion," he'd always say. "Don't spend for the moment, invest for the future." So I had, quietly, steadily. And when the company grew, my shares grew with it. I wasn't wealthy beyond imagination, but I was comfortable, comfortable enough to ensure my old age would not be spent in want, and apparently comfortable enough to have the captain of this flight recognize me in front of my own family. "Please," he said, gesturing with a courteous bow. "Come with me. First class is ready for you." The attendant, who had moments earlier looked at me with pity, now looked at me with awe. She nodded quickly, almost reverently, guiding me past the gate. Behind me, Daniel sputtered, "Wait, she's with us?" But his words died in the air, because now the entire boarding area knew the truth. The mother he tried to cast aside wasn't just with them. She was above them. Melissa lowered her gaze, cheeks flushing red, while Emma and Josh stared at me wide-eyed, as if seeing me for the very first time. As I followed the captain toward the cabin, the eyes of strangers burned warmly into my back, not with pity this time, but with respect. And though my heart still carried the sting of my son's betrayal, I felt something stir inside me. A reminder, a validation. I wasn't invisible. I never had been. The hum of the jet bridge echoed as the captain led me forward, his steps confident, mine a little unsteady. Not from age, but from the weight of what had just unfolded. Behind me, I could almost feel Daniel's embarrassment radiating like heat. He had wanted to distance himself from me, to make me small in front of strangers. Instead, the world now saw him for what he truly was, a man ashamed not of his mother's seat, but of his own actions. When we stepped into the cabin, the flight attendants greeted me as if I were royalty. "Mrs. Holt, welcome aboard," one said with a genuine smile, gesturing toward the spacious first-class section. "We'll make sure you're comfortable." I lowered myself into the wide leather seat, running my fingers along the armrest. It was more space than I needed, more luxury than I'd asked for. Yet in that moment, it wasn't the comfort that mattered. It was the dignity, the acknowledgement, the quiet justice of being seen. Through the curtain, I caught a glimpse of Daniel and Melissa herding the children into economy. Their faces were drawn tight, Daniel's jaw clenched, Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had tried to push me back to coach, to make me appear lesser, and now it was he who shuffled past strangers' stares while I sat in comfort. A few of the passengers who had overheard earlier now looked at him differently. I saw one man shake his head slightly, whispering to his wife. Another woman gave him a disapproving glare. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, but the judgment was there, and Daniel knew it. For a man who lived so much of his life on appearances, that judgment was heavier than any luggage. As the attendants bustled around, offering champagne and neatly folded blankets, I leaned back, allowing myself a moment to breathe. My mind drifted, as it often did, to my late husband. I could almost hear his voice beside me, low and steady. "One day, Marion, you'll be glad you made these investments. They'll protect you when no one else will." Back then, when I first put money into the airline, it wasn't glamorous. It was a gamble made on instinct and careful study, taken at a time when every dollar mattered. Daniel had been in high school, tuition looming over us, bills piling higher than I cared to admit. But I believed in building something for the future, even if it meant tightening the belt a little more in the present. Those small sacrifices had blossomed over the years into something substantial. I never flaunted it, never lived extravagantly. My home was modest, my clothes practical. And yet, because of those choices, here I was, not just a passenger, not just a mother being dismissed, but an investor whose presence carried weight. The captain returned briefly to check on me. "If there's anything you need during the flight, don't hesitate," he said sincerely. "It's the least we can do." "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm. But inside I felt a quiet fire. Not anger, not any more. Something deeper. A kind of resolve that told me I would never again allow Daniel to make me feel invisible. As the plane began to taxi, I caught one last glimpse of him craning his neck from the economy cabin, his eyes darting toward me. He looked smaller somehow, not in size but in spirit. His children, sitting beside him, kept sneaking glances through the curtain, curiosity and confusion plain on their faces. I wondered what they thought of their father now, and what they thought of me. I sipped the water the attendant placed in front of me, feeling the coolness spread through me. Justice didn't always come in grand gestures or loud confrontations. Sometimes it came quietly, in the simple reversal of roles. He had tried to exile me to coach. And yet, here I was in first class, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the lesson fate had prepared for him. The plane had been in the air for maybe an hour when I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, through the curtain that separated first class from economy, Daniel appeared. He hesitated at the edge, one hand clutching the fabric as if it were a shield. For the first time that day, he didn't look sure of himself. His shoulders weren't squared, his expression wasn't confident. He looked like a boy again, the same boy who used to hide behind my legs when strangers spoke to him. "Mum," he said quietly, glancing around as though embarrassed to be seen there. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" The attendant shifted, ready to step in, but I nodded. "It's all right," I told her. "He's my son." My voice was steady, though my chest thudded with 1,000 emotions. Hurt, anger, love, Disappointment. Daniel slid into the empty seat beside me. He kept his voice low, but I could hear the strain in it. I I didn't mean for it to come out like that, he muttered. You know how stressful airports are. I just, I didn't want things to get complicated. Complicated. That word again. My hands folded in my lap, the skin thin now, lined with years of sacrifice. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man he'd become, at the boy I remembered, and at the gulf between the two. Complicated? I repeated, my tone soft but firm. Daniel, you told a stranger I wasn't with you. You stripped me of my place in this family with one sentence. Do you realize what that felt like? He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Mom, I was just trying to make things smoother for boarding. No, I interrupted, my voice firmer now. Don't lie to me. You weren't smoothing anything. You were cutting me out. Do you think I didn't see the way Melissa smirked? Do you think I didn't feel the stares of strangers? You humiliated me. Your own mother. His eyes darted away, guilt flashing across his face. For once, he didn't have a defense ready. I leaned back in my seat, memories tumbling through me, spilling into words I'd held back for too long. I worked double shifts so you could go to school without worrying about bills. I skipped meals so you could eat seconds. I sat at every recital, every game, cheering louder than anyone else. I carried you through a life that wasn't easy. And now you want to carry on as if I'm just an inconvenience to be pushed aside? His lips parted, but I pressed on, the words trembling out of me with years of weight. You may see me as old, as someone who slows you down. But don't forget, Daniel, everything you stand on today, every comfort you enjoy, is built on my back. And instead of gratitude, you've given me shame. His eyes flicked up to mine then, glassy and wet. But he said nothing. For once, silence was his. From behind the curtain, I noticed two small faces peeking through, Emma and Josh, my grandchildren. Their wide eyes caught mine, filled not with judgment, but with confusion. They were listening, absorbing every word. A part of me ached that they had to witness this, but another part knew it was important. Children should see truth, even when it's messy. Maybe especially then. I softened my tone, though not my resolve. Daniel, I don't need your apology. Not today. The truth has already spoken for itself. The captain, the attendants, even your children. They all saw what you tried to hide. You wanted me invisible, but you forgot who I am. He swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging. Mum, I'm sorry. The words were faint, but they carried years of unspoken tension. I studied him, searching for sincerity. Perhaps it was there, flickering beneath the shame. Or perhaps it was only the sting of being exposed. Either way, it didn't matter. I no longer needed his validation. I turned back to my glass of water, my voice calm. Go back to your seat, Daniel. Spend the flight with your family. I'll be fine right here. He lingered, as if waiting for me to relent, to offer him the comfort I always had. But I didn't. Eventually, he stood and walked away, shoulders bowed, the curtain falling closed behind him. I exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from me. For once, I hadn't swallowed the pain. I had spoken it. And in that moment, I felt stronger than I had in years. When the plane finally descended, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels, I felt a calmness I hadn't known at the start of the journey. The roar of the engines no longer frightened me, nor did the thought of stepping off into another airport filled with strangers. What stayed with me was the knowledge that I had reclaimed something that morning. Not just a seat in first class, but a piece of myself I had almost surrendered. As the tires touched down and the cabin filled with the rush of people gathering their things, I remained seated, watching Daniel and his family through the small gap in the curtain. He fumbled with the children's bags, his movements stiff, his face drawn. Melissa avoided my eyes entirely, her lips pressed thin, her body language rigid with embarrassment. The children, though, kept stealing glances at me. Emma with wide-eyed admiration, Josh with a hesitant smile. They didn't fully understand, but they had seen enough to know their grandmother was not someone to be dismissed. When the attendant opened the curtain for disembarking, Daniel hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might approach me again, perhaps to apologize once more, perhaps to bridge the gap he had created. But then he lowered his head and guided his family forward, slipping into the stream of passengers without a word. I gathered my own bag, slowly, deliberately. No rush, no frantic scrambling. I walked off that plane with my head high, my steps steady, and though no one clapped or cheered, the weight of respect in the glances I received from strangers was more than enough. Outside the gate, the cool airport air hit me. The sounds of announcements, rolling luggage, and hurried footsteps filled the space around me. Yet inside, there was only silence, a silence that felt peaceful, not empty. I thought back to all the years I had poured myself into Daniel's life, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for his school plays, the weekends I skipped rest to take him to practices, the times I denied myself little luxuries so he could have what he wanted. And then I thought of this moment, this public betrayal. The contrast cut deep. But strangely, instead of only pain, I felt clarity. I realized something important that day. Love and sacrifice don't guarantee respect. You can give everything and still be treated as if you are nothing. That truth stings, but it also sets you free. Because once you understand it, you stop begging for recognition that may never come. You start finding your worth in yourself. Walking through that airport, I carried my suitcase with a new kind of pride. Not because of the money I had invested, not because of the word investor that had silenced a room, but because I remembered who I was. A woman who had endured, who had built, who had loved fiercely, even when love was not returned in kind. I may have been betrayed by my son in that moment, but I was also seen by strangers, by my grandchildren, and most importantly, by myself. And to you, listening now, wherever you are, whether you're in your kitchen, your living room, or lying awake in bed, I want you to remember this. Do not let anyone make you feel small. Not your children, not your spouse, not society. You are the sum of every sacrifice, every victory, every quiet act of endurance you've carried through your years. That cannot be erased by one cruel sentence. At the airport, my son thought he could push me aside, send me to coach, and pretend I wasn't with him. But the world saw me for who I truly was, and so did he. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to my story. And before you go, I'll ask once more, where are you watching from? I'd love to know.